you also back Pinterest and Uber and a variety of good companies.
Pinterest at the seed, and then Uber, that was the Series B. It was a 300 million valuation. So not seed, but not complaining.
You had this little challenge with Brian Chesky of Airbnb in terms of whose revenue would grow faster and faster.
I was an angel investor in Airbnb. I invested in the Sequoia round when they came out of YC. I got to know Brian, Nate, and Joe. As soon as those network effects took hold, the numbers just skyrocketed.
I think you guys were processing multiple billions.
We had taken our first seed round from Peter for Xoom, and then Roelof and Pierre led our round. It was Roelof's first deal at Sequoia. I think his second was YouTube. Yeah.
Were you making bombs as well in some fashion?
Yeah, absolutely.
This episode is brought to you by SemiAnalysis, the leading research and consulting firm for AI infrastructure and build-outs. They work closely with many hyperscalers, AI labs, hedge funds, and semiconductor companies that you know and respect. From tracking the inference economics of model deployments to every data center and the supply chains for fabs, servers, electrical equipment, and more, SemiAnalysis is an expert on the topic. If you want to learn more or work in the industry, visit semianalysis.com to see their research and purchase their models. Thanks again to SemiAnalysis and founder Dylan Patel. Now, onto today's episode. We can just start maybe as early as you would like and paint a bit of a picture about your childhood. What was it like growing up? Where'd you grow up? It was in the East Bay.
I'll start somewhat far back. I was born in Berkeley, in Alta Bates Hospital. Grew up in the East Bay of the Bay Area, and grew up not on the Berkeley side, which is kind of the cool hipster side, on the other side of the Caldecott Tunnel, which is this waspy, middle class, idyllic little neighborhoods and towns, in a town called Orinda.
Do you have very many friends, or what was it like growing up there?
Yeah, I mean, it was like a idyllic childhood, just like what you would expect in a very Americana childhood, and still have very, very close friends to this day. In fact, we're all on Kakao Chat, which is a Korean chat, because
You're on that now.
I'm on that now, and active on a daily basis. And I'm on Kakao because our close friend Jeff is in Korea. He's an expat, and we all stay close on this Korean chat.
I never heard of How Chat.
Yeah.
It's you, Jeff, and who else is there?
In a group of others, from Miramani is the name of the high school, other high school friends, Andy and Derek and Tommy and Steve.
And your dad was into politics, as I mentioned before, and obviously, you grew up with that sort of environment. Were there any values instilled in you?
Yeah, my parents actually, my mom and dad met at a political function in San Francisco at a Democratic Party function. We were naturally the Democrats in Orinda. At that time, Orinda was only Republicans, and we were the one standout, weird, strange liberals in town. I think because of that, I kind of grew up very politically active, worked on the different campaigns, and was just kind of aware in that world.
Did you ever have any firm take for or against, or was it just something that was put onto you in terms of this is how you should think or this is how you shouldn't think? Were you a bit of a rebellious person in any sense?
If you're a Democrat in Orinda, then you're a rebel. So maybe now that's changed, but I would say I kind of felt a little bit on the fringe.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And then maybe touch a bit more on that childhood, and then until you went to high school, what were you doing? Were you playing sports, or what were you spending most of your time on?
I mean, one interesting aspect was that for about 5 years, my dad took a job. He was working in San Francisco, and he took a job in Miami, and it was between about first to fourth grade. And my wife Julia refers to that as our sketchy Miami years, because we joked that my father was probably laundering money because that was like the height of the cocaine.
What was he doing in Miami? What was
He was
the
at a bank.
Okay.
He was
On-
general counsel of a regional bank in Miami
Uh,
in the 80s. Like,
Were
it
you-
just sounds like, well, I mean, my dad literally was a Boy Scout. Like, of course, like he has never done anything illegal in his entire life, but like the fact set is still so suspicious. So those are referred to as my sketchy Miami years.
and you were in Miami at that point.
Yes.
Okay.
It's just a great place to be a kid. Grew up, next to the beach, and you just spent your whole day on the bike or at the beach or in the water. Great experience.
And then you moved back to Orinda. Is that what happened?
Moved back to Orinda.
Okay.
It drew us back,
Mhm.
and what did I do? I don't know. It was before Legos. I used to make like model, like different models, and then blow them up. And I never worked at PayPal, but like the PayPal crew had always pointed out like the original team had all made bombs in high school. That's a very unpopular thing to say these days, but I guess it was like I don't know. I was like more of a pyromaniac or something than maybe somewhat rebellious, but
Were you making bombs as well in some fashion?
yeah, like yeah, absolutely. And so you would make these model boats or so on. I'd put them, in the pool and then set them on fire and blow them up. So now that I think about it, it sounds like a very kind of violent and tormented childhood.
Was it just intentional? It was something random you picked up on, or was there somebody else doing this? Like, was Jeff doing this?
It was kind of fun. Uh, it was kind of fun and something you do with your friends. I used to make those little stop animation films too, and one of them I made was called Murder in Smurfland, where we took our Smurfs and blew them up in different ways. And I always feel like my dad's like, "What's wrong with that kid?"
Is he proud of you now?
Oh yeah, he's
Uh-huh.
a great dad.
That's awesome. What did your mom was a real estate agent, right?
Yeah, that's right.
How did that contrast with your dad being in politics? Was there any sort of dynamic, or were they very united on that? This is how we're going to grow up and
Well,
parent our kids.
my mom was like a house mom, like most of growing up. And then as we got off to college, she had an incredible amount of energy. She was what's called first generation off the farm. Like my mom, or I'm first generation off the farm. My mom grew up on a farm and, so had an incredible work ethic, like up at 5 a.m. and always doing things like, so, when they were going to be empty nesters, my mom, had all this energy and really directed that to commercial real estate.
That's interesting. Nice. And so tell us a bit about the high school story. I think you played a prank. This is regarding the
The prank.
Yeah. So you've said it publicly. Maybe give us some details you haven't said publicly.
You have a lot of information on me.
Did my research.
Yeah. You could be a really good stalker.
Maybe. Hopefully not, though. I don't want to go to
Yeah. The high school prank was that, I think most high schools have a kind of senior cut day.
Yeah.
And myself and a couple friends said, well, we were on like student body leadership. We kind of had access to all the right things to draft letters and principals' signatures and things of that nature. And we basically sent out that there would be a school closure for a day, and it was coordinated with senior cut day because they found asbestos in the walls in the school. And we like went to the post office and put all this mail, that's nonprofit, like the school stamp or whatever, and sent all these out. And the day came and like chaos ensued. Like it was people weren't like all the students weren't showing up for school and everyone was up in arms. And I guess the word was like nobody could believe that the administration had really sent the letter because it was too well written, like that but we probably shouldn't have forged the principal signature, all this sort of stuff. And I was suspended for 5 days.
Were your parents mad, or they were like,
Yes, they were like livid. And then there was one of these like kind of award ceremonies where you get recognized for different things, and I wasn't allowed to go to it.
Do you have good grades in high school?
Of course, but for that ceremony, my mom went to it, and she went up and actually accepted the award on my behalf. And so all my friends, of course, like jeered her, and like yelled, and she was really upset and embarrassed. But good fun, I think.
That's funny. Fun fact. Another person I've interviewed, Chris Farmer, told me this.
No,
And don't know if you know this.
really,
Yeah, you guys both went to the same high school.
we did Miramani.
Yeah, he told me that out the blue. And it's, wow, I wanted to bring it up to you. Did I never know him, or he's years older or younger?
We kind of knew of each other, but I mean, like that's a rarity. Like there's not as many. I mean, now that tech has gone mainstream, um, like there's more Arindans in tech, but it used to be a very rare thing. Yeah.
And you guys weren't friends; you just knew of each other.
We knew of each other. Yeah,
Funny. That's amazing. And so from there, you went to Stanford,
that's correct. Yeah.
and you studied history and applied earth sciences, right?
Yes.
Why did you choose that combination? I
Yeah.
feel like that's quite rare.
Very rare. No, it's an N of one, as you would say. It's, I kind of liked it. This is, working on double major, and it was like kind of doing liberal arts and sciences. So it was this sort of contrast, but honestly, like I think I was like ahead of the curve. Maybe it was, like now there is the Doer Earth, Earth Sciences department, and that was really the foundings of that. My like thought process was just like, oh, I'm going to do this and save the environment and like save the world. And
Was computer science science at the time, or was it?
it was, but it was, it was like a tiny fraction of the number of students like were in the program versus it being the most popular program today. At the time I was there, it was, economics was the most popular.
Interesting. And when did you first meet Teal and all the other Stanford crew?
Yeah, so I met that whole crew in student politics my freshman year. I was like a freshman student senator, and Peter was a graduate student senator. And that's how I kind of met and came in contact with, people like Keith Rabois and Peter and David Sachs was a couple years younger.
Tell me a bit more about them. Were you guys hitting it off, or did you guys know you're going to start these companies or work together, or it was pure coincidence at the time that you guys had sort of come together via this club and became friends?
I think Peter always had a good eye for talent, and I was, more on the Stanford Democrat side, and there was Peter and Keith and the whole crew and David on the kind of college Republican side. There wasn't this like commercial orientation as much. It was really, how can we change the world or have an impact or positive impact on the world? It was during, that first big push to change Western civilization. It was during that, which was like the curriculum, the traditional curriculum, and Peter and the team was speaking out to stop that, and it was very prescient of what's happened later. And it was also the big first push with affirmative action, um, and so it really was this like kind of first wave that is then echoed, that we saw over the last few years here.
And were there any other people who were sort of maybe not touched on as much, who you still keep in touch from where Stanford is? Maybe friends of yours?
Yeah, I mean, I like the whole group. There's John Abbott was also part of that group, who's in Miami now. Michael Newman, who works with David Sachs, works on the pod on more of the writing side. Michael Newman's like a brilliant writer. Yeah, there was like this heavy concentration of talent. And I was always like referred to as their token liberal friend. And I like to always point out that liberals and conservatives got along.
Yeah. And were you in any clubs other than this, politics one, or you know that, or just
Stanford in Washington. I don't like to admit it now, but I was in a fraternity, which was probably too much fun. You know,
you
it's
joined
probably
freshman year?
I joined. Yeah, you rush your spring
Yeah,
quarter of your freshman year.
that's funny. Were you going out often?
You could say that. Yeah, I mean it's like brutal hazing. It's like
Yeah.
a barbaric hazing. I went to graduate school after and I remember like like people would ask me what it was like, and I'd describe it to them, and they just like couldn't believe the things that they'd put you through. But it was like barbaric, and we had to when you get rolled out, they'd like tape over the windows, so some would be, like somebody from the administration couldn't see what's going on.
And you said graduate school, so you went to Oxford, right?
I did, yeah.
Why did you go to Oxford? Why did you choose your major? What was your thought process like? Maybe paint a bit of that story after Stanford.
Well, I didn't study abroad, and I had done a little bit of everything, the applied earth sciences, history. So this was a chance to delve a bit more in onto the history side of things, and like what better place than in Oxford. It's like a incredible, beautiful place, um, and yeah, just and it was at University College, um, which is the college where Bill Clinton was during
Oh wow.
his Rhodes Scholarship, and just some really interesting people there. Now, of course, I'm forgetting his name. The Supreme Court judge was. We were in the. He was in graduate school too. Which one? It's
I know.
it's.
Are you still are you still in close contact with them?
I haven't. I should have stayed
Yeah,
in better touch, but
that's funny.
yeah.
And so, how did you go from there to then? I think you mentioned you did I research at some institute, and then you were a PM at Silicon Graphics. Touch a bit on that story. How much intention were you doing this stuff with? Or you kind of just maybe floating around, or I want to do that, and you did it?
Well, I came back to the US and like wasn't sure what to do. It's easy to take the LSATs and apply to law school, but I had like I had a lot of the pre-med requirements. I was thinking of going to medical school, and so I worked in this eye research lab.
Mhm. What did you research there? What exactly were you doing?
We would work with the rhesus monkey, and we'd put them in front of a screen, have them follow a dot, and we had effectively a BCI, an electrode
Yeah.
in their brains that we were measuring, this area called the superior colliculi, um, and so if you followed this dot in a screen, you could coordinate it with the firing of these neurons and better understand the brain and take
Yeah,
that information.
that's interesting. What was the conclusion of that sort of study?
Well, it was just in a sense of better understanding of how the mind works, but uh, what would just the nature of how neurons fire and communicate amongst one another.
Went there in a sort of a switch to being a PM, right?
Well, I was in that research lab, and we were all Unix. Like it was at the time of like of the first web browser had come out, Mozilla, and Mark Andreessen came out to the Valley and started Netscape with Jim Clark, and we had that like on our systems, and friends from Stanford were starting to go in, like we're starting to see them go to these different companies, Netscape and Silicon Graphics, and I went over and became a product manager at Silicon Graphics.
Yeah. Do you think PMs are useful?
I think so. Like here at Sauron, we're at the Sauron offices, by the way. We've decided to go no sans product, but that just means that our CTO is more the product manager. Yeah, I think that's a long debate, and it depends on different styles and teams. But yes, I say they're important when in fact at Sauron we have no PMs.
That's funny. And then you started your first company, right? Connect Group.
I started my first company, came out of Silicon Graphics, and met up with some friends from Stanford, and we built we started wiring up
Mhm.
uh, hotels with high speed internet
But
access.
you couldn't really raise VC funding, right?
We were, I mean, we didn't get very far. Like we actually we installed in one hotel in San Jose, and we had incorporated in April. And then this company called LodgeNet that at the time, if you went into a hotel and like ordered a movie, that would be a LodgeNet. It was either LodgeNet or this one other company. And LodgeNet was a public company, and they came and made us an offer, and we took it. So it was kind of a quick flip.
Yeah. What was that sort of experience, right? You said you were going out of Oxford a bit confused, and now you had made a good sum of money. I think you pitched Hilton, was it?
Well, we made like a nice sum. I think it kind of kept you hungry because it's nothing to retire off.
Uh-huh.
But I definitely found my passion of in tech, and just became
Yeah.
further and further like enamored with
Yeah.
the space.
What do you think's your best skill?
Silicon Valley is all really about uh, finding and helping get out of just helping great talent get to work. And so maybe it would be something about talent wrangling.
We can touch a bit more on that in regards to A-Star and Peterson Conway a bit later. That's quite cool. And then for
Peterson's
Yeah.
like he just had to wrangle talent.
Yeah.
Yes, he's like the recruiter.
he was, I guess, a core part of PayPal, right?
Uh,
Or first Zoom.
Zoom,
Zoom.
Zoom. Yeah. So Peterson got involved in tech through when I started Zoom. Um, he actually put his recruiting business on hold and became our primary relationship. So he'd go and build a relationship with the money transmission businesses in different countries, and travel around and do that with.
Take a step back and touch on how you actually got to Zoom. You were involved with PayPal.
Yeah.
Tell a bit of that story, and then touch on how you got to Zoom, started that, and sort of had Peterson in your corner.
Yeah. So, after Connect Group, Peter saw what was kind of happening in the Valley and came out, I think in like, 1996 or so, in 97, and was on Stanford campus and met Max Lepshin. Like he was giving a talk, and I think Max came up, and they kind of hit it off. And um, the two of them, started what became PayPal. It went through a few different iterations. It started as, um, I think it was like smart tokens or VP, like some kind of security over an early mobile device kind of, um, and then it evolved and became PayPal. But when PayPal merged as PayPal, and it was very clear it was kind of winning. Um, it's always been kind of like a playbook to like build a adjunct to it, and so um, I started Zoom as kind of an adjunct. We
The
were
first user of the API, right?
we were right the first developer on the PayPal API.
Touch a bit more on your mentors throughout this time. I think there's Pierre Lamond, right? What did he tell you? It was generally predicated on talent, right? If I'm not mistaken. And how do you actually identify talent? How do you hire people? All that jazz. What did he teach you?
Yeah, so Pierre was like hard driving. Um, he's still hard driving, and he's 96 now.
Do you want to
Who-
be like him?
I mean, of course, he's amazing. He like works harder than most at age 90, and he's 96 years old. But he came from the semiconductor industry as a physicist. He, just had an incredible wealth of experience on, building teams. And when, we had taken our first seed round from Peter for Zoom, and then Roelof and Pierre led our it was Roelof's first deal at Sequoia. I think his second was YouTube. Yeah. Pierre was this like semi guy, but he was just very wise and understood, team building and very, engineering centric. And I remember the first time I met with him, we had our first like kind of one-on-one, and he told me to kind of force rank the staff, the direct reports on the whiteboard. So I wrote out these like 6 or 7 names, and then he like grabs the pen and walks up and like crosses off the bottom 2 and says, "Fire those 2."
And did you?
I did.
You did.
Yeah.
Was that sort of a revelation for you, or was that kind of it made sense to you?
It was revelation. It was, it would by today's standards be considered harsh, but if you're force ranking and you're putting in everything depends on talent, and you have a um kind of the lowest in there. I mean, it's something to honestly,
Yeah.
really think about.
I think it's a great segue to Peterson. What did you learn from Peterson? And maybe paint a picture of who he is and how important he was.
Yeah. So Peterson is a recruiter. He's A-Star's recruiting partner, and he's also an amateur pilot and many other things. His full name is Peterson Goodwin Powell Conway the 8th, and he's a colorful character, and he's just a lot of fun to work with. And he lands planes on freeways.
Yeah. And so you joined Zoom early on, right?
He joined Zoom early on in this role of kind of business development, and it then went on to Palantir when Palantir was just getting started, and kind of was very innovative. Very you hear kind of these legendary stories of top talent. That was Peterson was
Did he-
part of grabbing those people.
What have you learned from him in terms of identifying talent? Maybe from Pierre as well. What do you look for?
I mean, Pierre was always like look for career momentum. So you want to just see, like there's someone starting someplace, but really picking up with each subsequent move, and that's contrasted by somebody that maybe every year just switches new position, new position, new position. Um, Peterson is more just his character of like engaging great talent. I would say is like his like best quality.
And give us a bit more detail or color, I guess, on how we would close them. Maybe touch on how we would fly them in an airplane and things of the sort.
Well, Peterson would, there's this sort of lore that, Palantir would send out these like embossed fancy letters that would say, you've been selected as like a top student at MIT or top student at Harvard to have the, right to, it's this kind of gamification of getting people to interview with your company, and did that, and it like had a lot of clever tactics to really engage top talent, and made it fun. And then other aspects would just, when you're working with engineers, like engineers love things like airplanes. And so Pearson would take him up in his Cessna and fly around, or, he was recently recruiting for Mach, and he would fly candidates down to the Mojave to watch, tests to see things blow up. We're back to blowing things up.
It's an easy close.
Yeah.
It's funny. How good was Zoom doing at the time as well when you joined? And how good did Zoom eventually do? I think you guys were processing multiple billions.
Yeah, well, Peterson joined very early on, like, and, I mean, we started the company really in the wake of 9/11. Like, there was not a lot going on. It was the dot-com bust and 9/11. The economy was in tatters. The company eventually went public in 2013 and was acquired by PayPal in 2015. I think it was doing about $6 billion in GMV, and it's still part of PayPal.
It's funny. I mentioned Zoom to my grandparents who are from India, and they didn't know what Eventbrite was. They didn't know what Adventure was, but I said Zoom. I know Zoom. So actually they use it. It's just funny. I thought that was so cool. And I mentioned this to you while we were grabbing coffee. Why did you finish Zoom? You sort of stepped down from it and then start another company. What is your driver at that point? It's not capital unless it was. Like, What is truly driving you?
Well, I mean, I moved out of the full-time role at Zoom, you know, relatively early on in the company's life. Like the company hadn't gone public yet and so on. But yeah, I mean, in any case, like it's not a money thing or anything else. It's you want to build things and do things with really bright people and so like Eventbrite was that next big adventure with Julia and Renault. Julia being my wife and co-founder, and Renault, third co-founder and CTO.
How did you wrap your head around working with your wife? I think most people say, don't start a business with your friend, definitely not family, and that this was your wife. That you guys ever
Yeah,
talked about stuff?
that's conventional wisdom, and you like you kind of have to test that first, like to find out whether or not like there's compatibility because I always say my parents, have always loved each other their entire X number of years. However, like they could never work together. There's a different calculus for a working relationship that has to be kind of tested out. Um, and so we had these like guideposts, or like one of us would step out or do something else that we found incompatibility, and we just kept going and going and going, and it just kept working and working.
And there's a story, and correct me if I'm wrong, she was answering customer service emails
Mhm.
in the delivery room, right?
She was, yes. The nurse like wrestled the laptop away from her. She's like, "What? A couple more." Yeah.
What was going through your head? You're like, this is good, this is bad, I'm having a kid.
Uh, yeah. I think like I think you're in kind of shock when
Mhm.
like you're in that delivery room. So I don't know what was going through my
Yeah.
head.
And you mentioned this during our last CFL score. You said you had this little challenge with Brian Chesky of Airbnb in terms of whose revenue would grow faster and faster until eventually Airbnb sort of took the lead. Maybe touch a bit more on that relationship.
Uh, well, I was an angel investor in Airbnb, and I got to know Brian, Nate, and Joe. They were down the street, and we had kind of formatted our metrics in a similar manner. And in a sense, have GMV driven businesses and net revenue that comes out of that. And of course, Airbnb has this like incredible network effects business that's almost unmatched. And so we had started because we had like kind of similar formats. We'd started like and we happened to be around the same, net revenue. Was it net revenue or GMV? And so we had these like revenue wars, and this went on for a little bit where we were actually winning. This is very early on, but then as soon as like those network effects took hold at Airbnb, like the numbers just like on the Airbnb side skyrocketed. Not that ours were bad; they were like very solid, but the Airbnb numbers were like magical. And so I was like depressed for about 5 minutes because I was very happy for um, Brian, Nate, and Joe and that business.
How early of an investor were you in Airbnb?
Well, I invested in the Sequoia round, the
Mhm.
you know the they when they came out of YC.
Mhm. Then you also backed, I think, Pinterest and Uber and a variety of big companies, right?
Yes,
How did you get
Pinterest
to
at
know?
the seed.
Yeah.
Um, I met Ben Silverman and Paul through Ed Baker, who is growth, like an amazing growth person, growth hacker who was at Facebook and then Uber. He's at Aura now, and um, I forgot how I just kind of knew Travis. I met Travis Kalanick when he was at Red Swoosh, and that was like the Series B. It was a 300 million valuation, so not seed, but not complaining.
So you eventually like, institutionalized this almost, right, with A-Star. What do you think you do differently than all of these the other seed funds, pre-seed funds?
Yeah.
You're better at identifying talent, or because to me, capital is pretty much a commodity at this point,
Correct.
right? So how are you winning?
Yeah, I mean, it always like kind of bothers me that you have the Peter Thiel competition is for losers, and then you have the like 2025 venture landscape where
50.
all these people are like um but what I would say is like I like operating with partners, whether it's Zoom or Eventbrite or now with A Star is like there's I'm the sum is greater than the parts, I guess, or of working with Gautam and Bennett and the rest of the team, kind of make me a better investor, but also act as a foil, um, in terms of, maybe I tend to be more impulsive and shoot from the hip and, they're more metered. And I do think we have a special dynamic as a seed fund, as a fund in general that's really not replicated elsewhere is we're a collaborative group. We actually really take the time to understand the businesses we're working on, not just the lead partner on something, but the entire team. And that's, I would say, very distinguished from any other partnership where they tend to be lone wolves. And when you bring something to a partnership, the other partners don't necessarily know it as well. Whereas in our case, the entire team has worked together on all aspects of understanding those founders in that business.
That's good. Are there any recent investments that you're really proud of, or how many checks do you write every year? How selective are you?
We write fewer checks. I would say we're more kind of snipers versus a bazooka. Some companies we've gotten involved in, Decagon is doing quite well. It's AI customer service. Um, I'm on the board of a company called WAP, Creator Services, Z Fellow. I'm on the board of a company called Cape, which is a cloaked cell phone, which is very exciting. And I think is almost the future of telecom infrastructure. But don't get me started.
You essentially incubated the Sauron, right, via A Star, and you raised a bit of funding as well.
Yeah, incubating is kind of a bad word, like, I I would say, like, we had the good fortune of meeting up with, um, Vasu, uh, our co-founder here, and we did this with the Atomic team, and Jack Abraham is a co-founder of this company as well. And Vasu is a roboticist, PhD in robotics and, with a focus on self-driving. And our and what we see is that there's been all this investment and work done in self-driving cars, and we're taking a lot of that innovation and applying it to home security.
How do you meet Vasu originally?
We were introduced via a friend, a mutual friend at Waymo.
Oh, I see. And you kind of hit it off. You knew it was her. Did you already have this idea, or it was a mutual?
We kind of bounced around for a little while, and then I need to come up with a better formation story. I think like it's kind of prerequisite to have some kind of no, I kid, but yeah, she's incredible. She was at Zipline at the time.
Is there some sort of founding story as to why Sauron was started? Somebody break into your house or something?
Somebody tried to break into her house, and we had a pretty fancy security system that didn't work at all. And if you in my wife Julia is very security minded, and so we had like two different systems installed, and neither detected this person that then tried to uh, push their way into the neighbor's house, and the police came and the whole thing. But you look at the security, the home security space. There's been zero innovation there. Like we think of Ring, but that was years and years ago.
It is. Do you guys have any clients now for Sauron?
We're in a private beta right now.
I see. Very cool. And what's the average ticket price, if you're allowed to say?
We're not going to give out pricing yet, but we're focused at the high end. So we're like a kind of high end solution. We'd almost like look at it as a luxury good, and we're excited when we reveal the hardware and the software and the whole shtick.
I like it. And so I guess more so present day, what excites you at the moment? Is it mainly Sauron as this new company? Is it investing? Where does most of your time go?
Like it's always around great talent, like whether it's here at Sauron or Ethan Thornton at Mock. It's always around um, people doing extraordinary things and extraordinary new things. And, you know, he's in and developing, um, you know, thrust like propulsion based drones or, um, Stephen at WAP. Yeah, it's really like a focus around like extraordinary people. And I'm kind of like indifferent to what area and I've kind of learned over time it's best not to try to like be, focused on a particular technology, focused on the people.
Is there any through line you've seen, maybe now that you can point to as to what makes somebody special? Is it some outlier background you've never heard before? Is it because they're immigrants, or what's some sort of trait that maybe is an indicator that somebody's good at what they do or they're special?
Like when I'm when I'm talking to a seed stage company, like oftentimes and usually first time founders, they like don't have a like rich history you can like pattern match on. So like a lot of times I'm like asking them about their families and their parents and their siblings and like how competitive they are and how intellectually oriented they are. Like a lot of times, they're first generation immigrants that they've and that's important because like you've come to the US and you've overcome a lot of obstacles to do great things, and you have like this edge to want to win and work, harder than everyone else. But I think, then there's like kind of really extraordinary people like Peter Thiel, where, you know, y- yes, he was like smarter than everyone at Stanford, but he also has just a kind of different way of seeing the world. And that like added sort of X factor is, yeah, makes him like a N of one, in fact.
Who do you think's had the most impact on your life? You think it's Teal or maybe Pierre?
I mean, I had the good fortune of having a lot of great mentors. Rula Fotha was on my board at Xoom and Eventbrite, both for 12, 15, 14 years each, with some overlap between the two. Um, Peter, he's just, his few words and insights are really impactful and incredible. Um, yeah, Pierre was has been a great mentor from that. But I think that's an important thing is like you spend the time to be around some really great people, and you get to see the impact of
I
that.
like it. Do you have any regrets looking back?
Yeah, I think most regrets, uh, revolve around like not going, like kind of staying the course of enduring things for a longer period of time. So, for example, like Zoom, we sold the business, and it was a great outcome. We sold it for $1 billion to PayPal. It was a public company at the time in 2015, but fast forward 10 years later, 2025, and there's Remitly and Wise, and both those companies are extraordinarily large right now. I actually don't know the current size of Zoom inside of PayPal, but um, those two companies were tiny. They were little startups at the time, um, and the market just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So, really enduring going the distance, you look at somebody like Jeff Bezos going the distance, it's extraordinary. So that's part of it. And, stayed around like through different downturns and things. That's important. That's like kind of a lesson is just kind of stay in the game and keep compounding.
What's the kindest thing that's somebody's ever done for you?
I don't know. When you say that, I think of my wife, Julia, because she's just kind by nature and always very unselfishly helping me.
That's awesome. And then lastly, what sort of values do you want to instill in accordance with your wife, Julia, into your kids and into the people you meet and mentor? What do you think is most valuable? Maybe a few traits or
Yeah,
lessons.
narrowing, maybe to two is, like driving to learn, like I got I loved my time at Stanford. Um, I loved the time at Oxford. Like, just the intellectual pursuit was great, and you learn so much. In building Sauron, it's such a different muscle in the hardware side or in the perception side. Um, and so that intellectual, like that thirst for learning is very important. And then it's related to that as kind of an adventure. Like when you're building and you're seeing success and you're growing, it leads you in all sorts of adventures as, whether it's like literally in the case of Zoom where we're traveling around the world to work with these partners in different countries, the adventure side. So those two, I would say, are kind of like the family values that like translate over to any founder. And when we work with founders, like that's what it feels like.